Welcome back to Take a Leap and Transform, a neurodiversity journey. I'm your host, Joseph K. Muscat. Are you ready to take a leap with me? Imagine there's a void, and in this emptiness, there are numbers that you cannot comprehend. Your peers can see these numbers and know how to put them together to generate new numbers, but all you see is endless confusion. Due to this, you stand out from the rest of your peers, where you are ostracized by them and teachers. What we're talking about here is dyscalculia, which is often phrased as the dyslexia for numbers and math. Today, I'm pleased to be joined with Nina Peischl, who was diagnosed at the age of 6 with dyscalculia. She will share with us her story. Welcome, Nina.
Hi, how are you?
Fantastic. I'm glad for you to join us.
I'm excited to be here.
So, Nina, let's start off with the first chapter of your life, which is why and when you were diagnosed with dyscalculia.
I was diagnosed at a pretty young age, at about 6 or 7 or so. That was when I was living in Vienna, Austria, and it was just because of my severe problems with math in school and my overall confusion, not knowing where left and right was. And so my parents took me to a psychologist at the time, and they did a bunch of tests and figured out that I had that form of dyslexia.
For those of us who don't understand dyscalculia, and even myself sometimes have difficulty understanding what it actually means, can you explain what that means to you and how you are affected?
Sure. To me, it's kind of, I was always explained it to be time, space, and numbers, and that just kind of being jumbled up in my mind and not really making sense. So things that have like a sequence, so just like numbers do, don't make sense to me. They're kind of just jumbled up in my head. So that's why I struggled with left and right, not knowing where to go. My mom had to, you know, take care of me when I would cross the road. She's like, look left, look right, but I was looking everywhere but left and right. Um, and then numbers, just not understanding how to do basic math, not understanding how numbers fit together, multiplications, subtractions, additions. It was just one big, like, it was just chaos. And then the space thing I always say is like just not being aware of my surroundings, not knowing where I'm going, not know where my house is, how to get anywhere. And that was from a very young age. I was always extremely confused as to where I was at any given moment.
It's a very interesting analogy that you were told and you're sharing with us. This not understanding the difference between time and space. So,
Yeah.
from a space perspective, then, as you stated, not understanding your surroundings and the navigations of your surroundings. And from a time perspective, how does that relate to, or how do you visualize, or having difficulty, should I say, in visualizing numbers and how numbers are combined to make mathematical equations?
I mean, I think like the time thing is like I could never read a clock when I was younger. I never really, even to this day, I don't really understand how 15 minutes go by. Sometimes 10 hours go by and I just have no concept of time. And in terms of math and mathematical equations, it's just like it's interesting because with my dyscalculia, the more complicated the math is, the easier I understand it and the more it makes sense. The more basic the math is, the more I'm lost. So statistics I was really good at in college. Like I managed to understand the concepts because they were so abstract that my brain grasped it. But 37 minus 18, I couldn't tell you. Like people, my friends will just, knock it out and just tell me the answer in 3 seconds. And I'm like, how do you even compute that fast? That makes absolutely no sense to me. So it's like, it's interesting how it's like the more complicated, the easier, and then the simpler, the more lost I am.
That's an interesting twist then. So when you say it's more abstract how? In the sense of, because, and the reason I bring this up, because there was an interesting study back in the early 90s in regards to, from a Canadian perspective, I'm trying to raise the level of education of understanding mathematics. And one of the arguments presented was that one, we need to focus not on memorizing numbers, but on number sense, having a good understanding of how 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 numbers work. And then
Yeah.
that brought in the aspect of that we should be teaching math like we teach English. It's not about 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's more about the understanding of the concepts of mathematical equations. So
Right.
is it, so with that explanation, is this what you're referring to when you say that it was more abstract, that you were able to understand it versus the basic arithmetic?
I think, yes, I think also because when you get into more complicated math, it ties in other aspects and other elements. It's more like problem solving and you're thinking critically and you're trying to figure out, you're solving for different things rather than just a basic subtraction. But it's interesting because it's like I will understand more complicated like algebraic equations. I understand how they function, how they work. But then even within that complicated equation that I understand and I can do, once it gets down to, solve for X and you have to do 25 minus 17, which equals X, that's where I'm like 25 minus 17. Like that's where I struggle, but it's not the actual concept of the equation. So it's like I understand that because it makes sense to me, like in terms of like units and stuff. It is, I guess, like a language. Then when it comes down to the basic of the math, I'm like, it just takes me much longer. When I was younger, I was just completely lost. Like as an adult, I've learned how to kind of do my own thing so I can make sure that I know the answer. It might take me longer, but when I was a child, I was just in space.
It makes sense, and I'm just trying to relate it to my visual perception, working memory, and visual motor and dyslexia. There's various levels when we talk about neurodiversity. So for example, I can read, but I can sometimes have difficulty with comprehension, and I can understand the abstract concepts that's being presented in an article or a book. I mean, I may have to reread it a few times because of the comprehension issue, but eventually I get it. Where
Mhm.
I struggle though is like you, the basic arithmetic. I struggle greatly in regards to grammatical structure and punctuation and spelling and the rules of spelling. So spelling and grammar is just out the door, despite my struggles of trying to put those pieces together.
Yeah.
So it's very relatable in that sense, and trying to understand that you have the difficulty of, say, doing simple multiplications or simple addition or subtraction. But when it comes to the wider concepts and putting all those pieces together, you're able to put that together. And I'm relating it in the sense as well that where I tend to struggle, I can do to a certain extent, the basic arithmetics. I get lost during percentages and decimals. And I
Mhm.
definitely get really lost once I hit algebra. But it's interesting where you tend to excel on the abstract of algebra, which where I struggled, but
Yeah.
but you couldn't do the basic the basic arithmetic that followed after in conjunction with that algebra. That's really interesting, and how there's a similarity, but at the same time where that breakdown happens.
Yeah, it's kind of almost embarrassing because it's like I can't work at a cash register and do the math in my head really fast, and it's almost like I'm stupid on a third grade level, but then I can do college level statistics, and I'm like, this makes sense. And people are like, can you help me with that problem? But they don't know that I can't help them with like 10 plus 15. It's like it's almost a joke. People are like, just, be serious, be for real. Like that's you're lying, but I'm like, no, I literally can't do this subtraction and addition, but I can help you with your statistics homework. It makes no sense. But
You can understand the difficulty with that, but it's interesting because you're adding that different perspective and understanding in
mhm.
regards to dyscalculia. So you also, during our prep talk, in regards to your dyscalculia, you also mentioned, this you felt like you were free falling, and that there
Mhm.
was this sense of panic and loss. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've experienced that panic my whole life. It started out early in childhood when I was in class. Just the fear of even going to class and having these adult teachers bully me every day and, call me up to the class to do all these math equations and math problems at like third grade level. I had a panic because I just knew that I was lost and like I knew there were students that understood the concepts, but for some reason the teacher was like looking through the class and she was like, who knows the answer? Everyone has their hand up, but me, Nina, come up in front of the class. And it was like my heart always sunk into my gut. And I always had like high anxiety because I was like, why is she calling me? And then I had a panic attack. People were laughing at me. I was being bullied. It was just like a whole situation. And then same thing today. I mean, like if I'm working, I've been a manager of fine dining restaurants. I'm managing 75 plus staff members. I'm managing a $13.5 million restaurant on Las Vegas Boulevard Strip. And then I'm at the front register and someone's buying a like drink and they're giving me a $20 bill and I have to give them change. And I'm just like, 20, 30, 15, 16. And then they ask me a question like, how was your day? And I'm like, oh, it was good. And then I look back down and it's lost. I'm like, what did I just do? I have to recount again and I look stupid. It's like that panic comes back because it's like the most basic math. I just freeze and I can't be distracted and I have to focus. And it's just like a sense of panic and like you feel stupid in front of people that like are like, what's wrong with you? It's basic math, like get it together, you know? Anyone does that at the grocery store that's working there, like the most basic person can do it. Why can't you? So it's like it can get difficult sometimes.
Yeah, it's always the double-edged sword when it comes to neurodiversity because you're expected to present and socialize by neurotypical standards.
Yeah.
But they because it's the invisible disability, or
Hmm.
I don't even like using the word disability. It's the fact that we think and operate differently, but because it's not seen, people have a hard time relating and understanding those internal thoughts or internal struggles that we are dealing with, due to society not understanding. If I always argued that we had this physical external thing for people to see, then they would have a completely different perspective and understanding.
I mean, yeah, if I was wearing like a cast and I had my right arm was broken and I was like, I'm sorry, I can't give you the change so fast, people would be like, oh my God, it's totally fine. Take your time, count that change. Like, take your time. It's okay. But if I don't have a visible cast on and I still need that extra time, it's like people are like, well, what is wrong with you? Like, I don't see the problem here. Like, just count the change. It's not that hard. It's $3.72. Like, but to me, I'm like, oh my God, okay, 70 is 25 cents, plus 25 cents is 50 cents, plus a dime is 60 cents. Like by the time I get there, I'm just like going in like step by step and it's taking double the time.
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, I see, I always watch people at the cash register who are able to do it really well and do the basic math in their head without having the cash machine do it for them. And it's like, I need the machine to do it for me because I can't do it in my head, so I can completely relate and understand the awe and frustration, the awe from our perspective that, how did you do that? And the frustration from the other perspective of why you can't do that.
Right. And I think like sometimes I use the register. Obviously, I'm not doing it in my head because I would not be able to do that. The cash register pops up and says, you owe the customer $1.73. And usually like I lie to the customer and I'm like, hold on, the machine is freezing. How weird, because a lot of people use credit cards, so there's no issue. So some people that use cash, I'm like, hold on, the machine's freezing. Like, give me 1 second. Like, what's going on? And as I'm lying to them that it's freezing, I'm like, $1.73, $1.73, $1. And I'm like counting 25, 50. Okay. And I'm like, hold on, give me 1 second. 50, 50, 50, 60. Oh, okay, it's working again. And then I'm like 50, 60, 60. Another 10 is 70, 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, here you go. And like, it looks like in my head, I'm putting on this whole show. On the outside, it looks like, oh, my machine isn't working. Boom, boom, boom. Here's your change. But in reality, I'm like putting on this little like facade
Mm-hmm.
and currently and I'm panicking and I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then I'm still unsure, like, did I give them the right change? I'm just like, I have a little tactic, but it's still just a lot of pressure for no reason.
Right. And it's a interesting how you're coming up with masking solutions, which we'll get into in a few minutes. So I want to move on a little bit here now, because you've gone through from our conversation not one but three different education systems, and you
Yes.
mentioned that you were diagnosed in Austria,
Hmm.
but later on in life you moved to Malta, and
Yes.
then in your post-secondary, which we'll get into later, you went into the United States. So let's
Hmm.
start off with Austria and Malta.
Okay.
From those two perspectives and your experience in the school system, how supportive or unsupportive was the school system?
For the most part, pretty awful. I mean, Austria, they did not care. I mean, no matter how many times my parents went to the principal like office to explain to her why I was so confused. I mean, they were like, "Yeah, we'll give her extra time, or we'll, figure it out." But the teachers didn't really care, and they were just very impatient. I went to private schools my whole life, so you know, I guess my parents probably expected the private school that they were paying a lot of money for to kind of be more helpful, you would think, but they also did not care. Malta, I went to Verdala. They were also not very equipped to deal with, you know, dyslexia and needing extra time. I usually just try to sit in the back row or, try to figure out my own tactics, so not very helpful. QSI, which is where I went in Malta, also, which is the school that my mom established at the time with the Belgian ambassador, I believe. That place was great in terms of helping me because I mean I was the third student, so it was like it was hard not to be helpful because it was only me and one other student in the class. It was almost one-on-one. It was, people were patient. Teachers could take way more time with each student because there was only three students. So it's like I guess they didn't have a choice but to be supportive, even if they didn't want to be. They ended up being supportive. But I think if that school had like a normal amount of students, like 300 students in the school, and like 20 per class, it would be a very different situation. I think it would be more difficult to allow me more time. So overall, pretty poor.
Pretty poor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I think, to a certain extent, there has been a degree of improvement. And at the same time, another extent, there hasn't been a sufficient amount of improvement. And when you have, and part of the problem being is that the education system wasn't designed for us, right? It
Right.
was designed for the neurotypical slash average student. And
Yeah.
what is an average student? And teachers, may have been given, I don't know, a 1 hour course on neurodiversity, and that's it. Their
Yeah.
goal and objectives is to create a course curriculum and to get students hurdled through that course curriculum,
Yeah.
regardless of their challenges or not. So they don't know how to adapt and how to support. And it's interesting, it's not the first time that I've heard where parents, and myself being a parent, so I'm going through this myself, is that it's the parents who are of neurodivergent children who are waving the red flag saying, hello, you need to pay attention, you need to do something about this. And
Right.
it's the parents who are being the activists trying to get their children to support. And in your mother's case, she helped create a private school where you would get that support. And
Yeah.
you're right when you say that a small class size where you're able to get that one-on-one attention, where the
Mhm.
teacher is, because of the size, is kind of forced to adapt to you versus a class of 20 or 30 students.
Right.
So with the parents in place, let's look at a different perspective. Actually, before we get into that, in the opening and just a couple questions before, we had talked about you being ostracized. And in particular, you were ostracized not just by your peers, but by your teachers. Can
Hmm.
you expand on how not only that they didn't support you, but how they made you stand out? And would it be fair to say, because you mentioned that this adult picking on a child, so it was even far worse that someone of authority
Yeah.
was, on you rather than lifting you up.
Yeah, I mean, I think throughout my entire like education, like in Austria and Malta, there have been like maybe one or two teachers that were really truly sweethearts. And I remember one teacher in Verdala, like really just kind and like you could tell she loved kids and loved her job and was patient. But most of the other teachers, it's like they woke up and they just chose violence every single day coming into the classroom. They would purposely call me out to the front of the room. They would purposely like make me try to answer questions like publicly in front of the class, knowing that I'm, panicking, knowing that I don't know what's going on, knowing that I'm not sure how to do it. It's almost like in their minds, if I can't do it, I'm not paying attention, I'm disrespecting them. And it's almost like they have to like assert their dominance, which I think now as an adult, that's beyond ridiculous and psychotic because it's like that's emotional abuse. And a child at age any age, because your brain develops at 25, is a child that does not understand what you're doing and doesn't understand why it doesn't know what it like. Why is like I'm not understanding why I can't do the problems. I'm overwhelmed. I can't emotionally control myself. Like I'm completely lost and scared and overwhelmed. And now I'm also like, I'm already dealing with growing up and my life and trying to figure out school and trying to fit in with my peers. But now I have the teacher who I'm supposed to go to for help and guidance bullying me in front of my peers. Then my peers are bullying me behind, like in the playground. And it's just like, you're just creating an even more toxic environment rather than just telling the class, hey, like, it's totally okay not to understand things. It's totally okay to need a little extra time. Like, let's go through it again. Let's try explaining it a different way and making it like a normal, casual thing where the class is like, okay, like Nina's fine. She just needs a couple more minutes to like read through it or understand it rather than, haha, you're stupid, and like throwing a pencil at my head, like it's just, it's actually sad and disgusting. And the teachers that I've had that have done that should not be in an educational environment with kids. Like they would be better off in college where you can just yell at a bunch of students in a giant lecture hall and do whatever you want, like it's just not with kids who are like impressionable and already scared.
No, it's interesting. There's a number of things to unpack there, Nina, and I could really feel your pain as we're covering this, and I'm also reminded of my own childhood experience and what both peers and teachers have put me through, two in particular. And it's always interesting that you run into these particular teachers where there's just a complete lack of empathy
Yeah.
towards a student who is obviously struggling, and they're not
Right.
they're not lifting that student up. There's a great argument, and it's an argument that I use, that, and you've pointed it out in your conversation, or sorry, in your conversation, what you were describing, is that the teacher is the center of the classroom, and when the teacher behaves towards one student badly, all the other students feel that now that gives them permission to do so as
Right.
well. And when you actually talk to those students on why, what's your problem with Nina, the first thing they're going to say is, well, the teacher behaves that way towards Nina. So
Right.
it's the teacher that sets the culture of that classroom. And I argue that because the classroom is designed to prepare students for the workplace, there's a direct line of what happens in the classroom towards the workplace, where it's the manager who's the center of the culture of their employees. And if
100%.
and if the manager's behaving badly towards one employee, that gives permission for the other employees to do so as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as an adult and having like, I'm in management, I handle my staff completely different. And then I end up being in a position where like I'm, say, the assistant general manager and the general manager is some 65-year-old, 75-year-old white man who's like in his, like, he's just in his ways of being taught, and like he's the way that he is, and he's been brought up to like kind of make fun of people. And like obviously there's younger girls and like people that are like working in restaurants, so they may have like panic attacks or problems understanding things or taking more time. And you can just see that the general managers will just make fun of them, bully them in front of staff and things like that. And I'm always the one that was like, you literally can't do that. Like, stop. And I'll talk to them and be like, hey, it's totally okay. Like, take a deep breath, take a couple like 5-minute break. Like, here's some cold water. Let's go through it again. If you don't understand anything, like, let me know. I'm confused too. I get this wrong all the time. Also, like, I make it very like, it's totally normal. Like, I'm the manager, I'm the assistant general manager. I get confused. You can get confused, and then that usually makes people feel way more comfortable, like brings the anxiety down, and then it's like they're more open and susceptible to actually understanding and learning. So I just wish that I had someone that handled that in the classroom like I do in the workplace as a manager. It's like that would have made my life much better.
Understandable. And it's really, you used two particular words that were very powerful and really stood out from your description, which was violence and psychotic behavior.
Yeah.
Those two words just really stood out of your experience and the impression that these teachers left on you, because
Yeah.
you are neurodivergent, because you were not normal by their standards.
Right. And I just think it's like, how did you decide to get into a field that deals with a generation that needs to be nurtured and grow and learn and like feel good about themselves and build self-confidence and understand the world? How did you pick that profession if you enjoy putting people down? It's like, imagine a teacher in a playground and a child falls and scrapes its knee, and she's just like, get up, like stop being a wimp, like stop crying. Like, why would you wouldn't do that to a little like 6-year-old girl that fell off a playground slide or something? You wouldn't like laugh at her and be like, everyone look, like she fell again. You know what I mean? Like that's insane behavior, but you're doing that in the classroom where I'm supposed to feel confident about my education. And for the longest time I felt stupid and I felt like I could never succeed. Like I was like, I gave up. Like by sixth grade, fifth grade, I was like, I'm done. Like I was getting C's, F's, D's. I was like, I don't care anymore. I'm not even gonna try because I'm stupid anyway. And the teachers know that, and I'm just a bad person and a bad, like I'm just stupid. Like I'm never going to succeed. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm not even going to think about college, because how am I supposed to manage college if I can't even manage this basic class and teachers are basically telling me I'm stupid? So just like my self-esteem from like an educational standpoint was just in the gutter.
Mm.
So it's like it only went up when I transferred to QSI and I had that one-on-one, and I was like, wait, I understand this. I understand math. I understand English. I understand science. Like this all makes sense. And then I was getting a 4.0 GPA all throughout high school.
Wow.
It's
I
like,
mean, what a difference. What a complete difference. And it's you again, you're painting such a very powerful picture of at sixth grade. So that means trying to think of the age difference now, because I'm
I
trying to
think
think, yeah, 11, 12, 10, 11, 12. Because I'm trying to also think of, because I grew up in Canada versus in Malta, would be roughly the same age period. But at
yeah.
10 or 11, though, you're ready said, I give up on life. Life is
Yeah. And
hopeless. I can't go any further.
right. That's crazy. I've only been alive for 11 years and I don't even count the first like 5 or 6. I've only been like somewhat conscious person for like 5, 6 years. And I'm already like, I'm stupid. I'm too stupid for this world. I can't get anything right, you know? And then to go from that to 4.0 and get valedictorian in high school and, get accepted to a college across the country and go to the US and get a good grade. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's crazy what just a little bit of change in my environment did for me and my self-esteem.
Huge difference. So, in contrast, then, let's look at your parents. And some parents may have a hard time understanding and knowing how to navigate and how to support a neurodivergent child.
Yeah.
How were they there for you?
So they were there for me 100%. I think both parents were very different in the way that they supported me. My dad is the one who has dyslexia and dyscalculia himself. So he just immediately understood, sympathized, empathized, and was like, I lived the exact same life that you're living right now. Just back in like the 70s. And so he was like, I totally get it. He was there for me. If I had a math problem and he explained it one way, I was like, this makes no sense. He was like, no problem. Let's explain it a second way, a third way, a fifth way, a 10th way. Like he made sure that he was just trying to explain it in every way, shape, and possible. My mom, who's I feel like normal when it comes to numbers and math and stuff, like her brain just works properly. She would get frustrated with me. She'd be like, okay, like what's 34 minus whatever? And I'm like, 10. And she's like, no, like she would get frustrated. She wouldn't know how to change the teaching for me to understand. But she was kind of like the emotional bodyguard almost. She was like fighting for me at school. She was making sure I got good teachers. She was like talking to all the principals. Like even when I was not at QSI and I was like, the teacher is bullying me, or the teacher is picking me out of the classroom, she would immediately get crazy and like go to school and be like, I need to talk to the teacher. I need to talk to, she was like the emotional front and like the first line bodyguard. And then my dad was behind the scenes, like, okay, let's try it this way. Let's try it this way, So it was a team effort, and together they created actually like a really beautiful support system.
That's fantastic. That's really wonderful. I'm just trying to compare between my daughter and I. It's quite the opposite. As much as I love my daughter, I can't teach her as much as I try to.
Yeah.
But I'm supportive in the sense of my wife's the calm one, but I'm supportive in the sense it's like, okay, let's find someone that can teach her, and let's put our efforts in finding her someone that can support her in a way that we can't. But at the same time, when we hear about her having troubles at school because of bullying with teachers or peers, I'm the one, and my wife's the one holding me back, saying, "Okay, handle this professionally. Don't get aggressive.
Yeah, that was my mom. So my dad like calm down, like let's take a step back. And she was like, no, I have 5 appointments already lined up with all the headmasters and every teacher. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So she definitely handled that aspect, as well as I think the like my dad handled the numbers part almost of my dyscalculia, and then my mom helped me a lot with left and right. So I remember like the psychologist gave me a bunch of like games when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. And so there was like tiles in the old apartment that we were at in Vienna. My mom would be like, okay, you're a robot. And I was like, okay. And she's like, you're on this tile. Take 2 steps forward, like one tile, okay. And then she's like, okay, one tile to the right. And I'd be like, and she's like, stop. Left hand is an L. That means it's left. And I'm like, okay, left. I write with this hand. This is right. And I'll like take 1 step to the right. So she was like in charge of like the little games too. It was like
Hmm.
a large team effort for sure.
Well, it's very crucial in any environment when it comes to children that there are two supportive parents
Mhm.
trying to navigate to the best of their ability in
Right.
supporting their child, but in particular, a neurodiverse child, because they're going to have such more adversity that they're going to have to go through in society and particularly in the education system, because it's not just the child and the teacher, it's the child, the teacher, their peers, and the system that they're going to have to deal with.
Right.
So,
100%.
so let's touch up on how are you able to develop coping mechanisms to assist you in managing your dyscalculia? And what advice can you share for your fellow dyscalculias?
I think sometimes people don't understand at all what you're trying to tell them about yourself. And I think like that's really difficult, but you can't force someone to understand. Only you can understand yourself. And I think over time, it's like difficult because you have to like kind of learn about yourself as you go, and you make a lot of mistakes and you feel stupid, you feel silly, you take too long, you mess up on a calculation, whatever it is, like you learn over time like the things that work for you. Like for me, it's like when I was in college, I was like, okay, I physically cannot be sitting in the middle of the lecture hall. I'm going to lose my mind. I have anxiety. People are hovering behind me. People are all around me. Like I need to be in the back row on the corner. So I only have left of me someone and in front of me someone, and like behind me and to the right of me a large amount of space. And I feel like I'm kind of lying to myself. I'm like, I'm almost in my own room. I'm in the back. Like this is just section, like kind of like lying to myself. And then if I do a test, for example, like I'm doing it timed, regular time. I don't have double time. I'm just going through. I'm like, okay, I know this answer for sure. Boom, I'm going to answer it. The second that I don't know a question, I'm confused, skip. I don't care. We're going to skip it. We're going to not even think about it. And we're just going to do everything that we know that we can do. At the end, I'm like, okay, I have 30 minutes left. Perfect. I have 3, 4 questions that I'm completely confused on. I can take 10 minutes, whatever, 7 minutes comfortably on each question. I'm like, reread it, like take notes, like highlight things, circle things, whatever works for you, kind of figure out what that is, and then just implement it. Like whether people see it or don't, as long as you get to the answer and you get to the finish line, people shouldn't question you. And I've had that argument with bosses a lot. I'm like, I'm doing it this way, but it's still getting done. So there should be no argument as to why I'm doing it in a different way. It makes more sense like this. It shouldn't matter because it's still getting done properly, like, and usually they're like, fair enough. Like that, that's the way you want to do it. That makes no sense to me. And I'm like, it doesn't have to, it makes sense to me. So it's like, sometimes you have to like also stand up for yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what you described there is what is known as role results only work environments. So it doesn't matter, you know, how you do it, where you do it, as
Yeah.
long as it gets done and it's done by when it's supposed to be done. It's because in the end of the day, it's not about how it's done, it's about the final result.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit easier in the real world versus like in school, they really do force you to do that math equation the way it needs to be done, the way the teacher thinks it needs to be done, like step 1, 2, 3, otherwise you're wrong. So it's like there's a little bit more flexibility, I think, in the real world where you can be like, I'm gonna do this on my laptop at 4 in the morning if it's due at 8 a.m. I don't care. Like if that's what you want to do it, I want to do it before work. I want to do it, whatever it is, like you can just do it your own way if that works, and then just explain to the boss like, hey, it's getting done, and just this is easier for me to handle it.
Hey, listeners, I want to share with you a new program that I put together to bring awareness and to up-level the skills of employers and managers. This workshop aids in building a more inclusive environment for the workplace for neurodivergent talent and in developing the skills of managers to become more engaging with their teams. Reach out to me on my website to learn more about this amazing program. Yeah,
you
that's
know.
interesting because it's interesting because you brought up another study where they did two separate studies. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I'm talking about two different studies done in two different time periods. One was focused on the students and one was focused on the teachers. In both scenarios, when it came around math, the student and teacher were both able to perform the operation. They were both able to get the answer, but neither one of them understood why the answer was the answer.
Yeah, right.
And when we look at it from a teacher's perspective, especially when a teacher is being trained as a general teacher, so they're one teacher that teaches all subjects, they're only taught one way how to do a math problem. And they're never taught how and why that answer is the answer. So when they try to introduce that teacher to different ways of trying to come up with the answer and different ways of how to teach it, the teacher is utterly confused and so to a certain extent kind of throws a tantrum and says, I can't do it. I can't do 10,000 different ways that you've shown me when I can't even figure out and understand why the first way that I know works. And this is obviously being transferred to the students. So the end of and I was talking to someone here locally, and he says, I showed my son three different ways on how to come up with the same answer. He went to school, showed the teacher, and the teacher said, yes, that's nice, but I only want you to do it the way I showed you, because that's the
Yeah,
only way that they know. And it adds this frustration and confusion because at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out all the different ways and how to do it. And at the same time, it's about getting the end result. And if
right.
you have someone that interferes with you doing it the way you understand it, then it interferes with your ability to get to the end result.
Right. I think that teachers are mostly just robotic. And it's like they input and they output. And the second that you do something else, they're just like start foaming at the mouth. They're like, what's going on? I don't even understand. But because school should be about understanding the concept and applying it to different things rather than just knowing that 2 times 2 is 4, like without understanding why and without understanding how and like how to apply it to the real world. And so it's like I've had situations where I figured out a different way to do it, like math equations, for example. I'm like, this is exactly how I understand it. And the teacher said the same thing. Oh, well, that's great. And that's an interesting way of doing it, but you have to do it my way. And then I ended up doing double the work because I just memorized their equation and where to put the numbers. And then I did it my way, got the answer, pretended like I did it their way. I just put the numbers where I know they need to go, got the answer, and I'm doing it 2 different ways. And I'm spending double the time on one problem, getting the same result, but making it seem like I did it their way when in reality I was doing it my way the whole time. And then there's been some teachers who have been very understanding. They're like, oh, interesting. Like, do you want to come up to the board and show the class how you got that answer with your method? And then usually like those are the only very rare moments where I was excited to go up to the class. I felt smart. I felt proud. I was like, I can do this. Like I can do something differently than other people. Like I can show them, I can teach them. And so I would go up to the class and be like, I did this and this and this. And then step 2, this and this and this. And then boom, I got the answer. And then, some students were like, oh, that makes sense. Like that is way easier. And then some very rare, like maybe 2 teachers out of the entire time that I went to, till high school were like, that's a really good way. Like, good job for finding a different way. That's very interesting. Like they're the only ones that were like understanding. Everyone else was like, I don't care. Do it my way or you fail.
You're really
It's
giving
like,
a very interesting, again, you've really painted a fantastic picture. And I'm really stuck on the teacher foaming at the mouth.
yeah,
I mean, and it's so true, unfortunately, isn't it? It's really so true of this teacher foaming at the mouth about you not doing it their way.
right.
And again, you paint a wonderful picture of the difference between a teacher and an educator, a leader.
Yeah.
Someone who says, okay, this is how it works for you. This is a
Mhm.
different way. Let's get you to share that versus this, do it my way and forget
Yeah.
about the way that you understand it. And you doing double the work. It's like you're forced to do the double the work to appease them, despite the fact that it's a waste of your energy and it's hindering from your ability to do it the way you understand it.
Right. And at the end of the day, have I ever used those math concepts ever again in my adult life? No. Where's the teacher now? Probably like 85 years old. You know what I mean? And I'm just
Yeah.
like, why just let me learn the way I need to learn? You know, it's just like, it's so ridiculous. Like they're throwing adult tantrums and I'm supposed to be the child. And it's just like, right.
Foaming at the mouth. Yes, adult tantrums foaming at the mouth. So let's move forward. I now want to jump to your university life as you
Yeah.
described this during our prep talk, being a dual cultural shock for you, as was both a new country and as well as a new education system.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
I mean, wow, going from being the third student at a school and being one of maybe five, craziest scenario in class, to I first went to Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. I was in a lecture hall with like 600 people. That is 10,000 times the amount of people that I've ever seen in any of my schools that I've been at, and that all in one class. And that was just one class, you know? So not only was it shocking to go from the little tiny island of Malta where everything's laid back and relaxed and everyone knows everyone, it's like a beautiful little sunny place, to like the United States, you know, where it's just like a complete culture shock and I'm all alone. I'm 18, I'm kind of antisocial, I'm freaking out. I'm kind of having those same feelings I did in elementary school where I'm like, I'm stupid, I'm like way in over my head. This is definitely too big of a shoe for me to wear, you know? And then going from one-on-one tuition almost to the teacher just walking in and yelling at 600 students is definitely a little bit shocking, to say the least.
How did you find the education system then? So, because I mean, you mentioned you going from one to one to now professors, speaking out to 600 students or yelling to 600 students. How were you able to adapt and adjust?
I think surprisingly, college was, at least in the US, was absolutely amazing when it came to learning disabilities. They had a whole disability center, huge building that was literally just for disability to any capacity. You could go in and show them, hey, I have dyslexia, and they were like, okay, awesome. We'll alert all your teachers. All the teachers got notified, hey, there's one student in your class that has that. And then I had the option of either taking exams in class with all the students, or I could go take it at the disability center, um, with double the time, bigger font, in an isolated room that was like proctored, obviously, so I wouldn't cheat. But it was like no one was around me. It was like just me and my thoughts in a quiet room, double font, bigger size paper. Like it was amazing. Like they offered me that, and they were like, nothing was wrong with it. And the teacher would be like, hey, I know that you have the disability thing. They're like, you have the exams due Monday. You can take it Monday or latest Tuesday, whenever they have an availability at the center. Let me know. Good luck. Like it was very not shameful or not, how dare you take 2 hours extra for this exam? Like you're an idiot. It was like, it is what it is. Here's the resource. Here's the opportunity. Thrive. It was nice, and that gave me kind of confidence because I had something, like I had like a cushion to fall back on. But I'm kind of the person that likes to jump into cold water, so I forced myself. I was like, okay, if I don't want to, I don't have to, which helps me mentally. So then I kind of was like, let me try to take the exams in class anyway. And that's when I started learning things like, back row, right corner, things like that, like little things that helped me. And I ended up doing really well and managing to get the exam done in 45 minutes. I was one of the first students out of the class, and I got a B plus or an A. And I was like, wow, who would have thought? Like I went from I'm stupid at 11 and I have no future to like 45-minute college exam, and I aced it. So it was interesting how that works.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious, the professors or the teachers' aides, they were aware of your neurodiversity. Other than approaching you about exams, did they approach you during lecture times, um, during their office hours? Were you able to come to them and have more of a one-to-one interact with them when you're having difficulty understanding whether what they taught in the lecture room or the particular assignments that they gave?
Yeah, I think in the lecture itself, they didn't really care. College professors are a different breed. They they just go in and they just teach and they're like, I don't even care if you're here or not. Do whatever you want. It's not my problem. Um, I think it's they really thrive in the office hours because they're like, come to the office hours to any student. Like, come in, ask me any question. And so I was kind of nervous at first. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna walk in there and be like, I have no idea what you said today in class, and they're gonna be like, you're stupid. But I ended up going in there and I'm like, hey, I'm really confused on these subjects. And they're like, sit down, let's go through it. And they're like so excited to teach me again and like explain to me what to do and give me tools and be like, check online, go to the syllabus, I have this and that posted, like maybe this will help, go to this YouTube video, like let me explain it to you one more time. So like they're very, very helpful. There's only a couple of teachers that were like bitter about their life that would like refuse to help me, but most professors were like happy to be there and like support my growth.
Fantastic. Again, I'm just comparing it to my own similar experiences because at York University, it's the same thing. They had a whole department dedicated to neurodivergence. They informed the professors and teachers' aides, extra time and so forth. I had a list of things that I could have taken as additional, such as someone to take my notes during lectures and so forth. Did you did you capitalize on all of what was available? I know you mentioned that that you started to go embrace the cold water,
Yeah.
but in contrast to that, though, did you still capitalize on some of the tools that they provided for you to be able to excel?
I think, yeah, I mean, in situations where I just knew that I was extra confused, sometimes I understand a concept and I'm like, I know exactly how to do this, but then I overthink it or I get confused or I kind of lose it. And so I need extra time to be like, what am I even doing? Like, what class is this? So those are the classes that I knew I struggled in, and I took advantage of the double time and stuff like that. Um, but usually when it came to notes and stuff, like I was always taking my own notes because I have a very strange way of coordinating notes. So I get confused if I read other people's notes because if someone that's neurotypical is taking my notes, they're taking it in a way that's like normal, but I'm organizing mine in such a strange way that if I read theirs, I'm like, what am I even reading right now? This makes no sense. So I was always like trying to do my own thing, but usually I capitalize on like the exam centers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I capitalize on that, because in hindsight, I capitalize on the extra time.
Hmm.
At the same time, though, and I capitalize on having help someone proof me read my work, especially because of the spelling and grammar. But then, such as a note taker or a couple of other tools that were provided, I didn't take those. And in
Yeah.
hindsight, I felt like in hindsight, I should have, now that I have a better understanding of my neurodiversity. And
Yeah.
I didn't take it as a sense of this learned helplessness because I was always told that in the real world, you're not going to have this kind of support. So you need to figure it out on your own. So that end up that mentality end up holding me back versus taking the tools that were available to push me forward.
Right. I think that's fair. I've also been told like you're not gonna have these tools on the outside world. And in all fairness, they weren't lying. Because I mean, the workplace is not a kind place, especially in the US. It's all about work and they don't even care if you're like sick or you break your leg. So let alone you're neurodivergent. So it's like it's kind of harsh sometimes, it's like they're not lying when they say no one cares because they don't. So it's like it's more difficult to maybe go to a boss and be like, hey, I need double time to get this task done and I need you to print it out in double font. They're gonna be like, I don't care. Like get it done. So it's like it's more difficult to have that availability in the real life. So it's like I guess it was a good thing in a way that we didn't capitalize fully on that.
I kind of agree from your perspective to one extent. At the same time, though, I completely disagree because in reality is the tools are there if we know how to use them and we know how to capitalize on them. And
Hmm.
at the same time, you have to become an advocate for yourself to get those tools.
Right.
And at the same time, I think the other caveat for that is that we weren't told that to get some of these tools, it's going to cost money and
Right.
that you need to be able to make enough to be able to provide for those tools. So right now,
Hmm.
for example, I'm self-employed. I need someone to proofread, my blog posts. that person's charging me 49 cents a word. If I do two blog posts a month, that's going to cost me 300 euros a month. So
Right.
I need to be making an extra 300 euros on top of that to pay for that. So
Right.
it is available, but there's that caveat of cost and how you're going to figure out to be able to provide that cost. Or
Mm-hmm.
it's also the caveat of explaining to an employer that that cost is actually a drop in the bucket for them in what the real cost for them is in regards
Mm-hmm.
to firing, hiring, replacing. Because in reality, the cost of providing reasonable accommodations is 7% of what it would cost to go through the recruitment process.
Right. True.
So, it's understanding and giving that explanation and even being aware for yourself to be able to know how to articulate that in the real world situation.
I will say it's kind of tough because like when you apply for jobs here in the US, they ask you if you have any disabilities, and that ranges from, you're missing a limb to bipolar to whatever. Um, and it's like obviously under ADA, like the American Disability Act, like they have to provide reasonable accommodation for you to do the job. But America being America, and I think the world being the world, when you click yes, I have a disability, suddenly, mysteriously, the email that you received back is, thank you so much for applying, but we did find a better fit candidate with more experience. We appreciate for your time and patience, but we did move on with somebody else. All the best. And you'll never know if it's because you really don't have as much experience as the person that they hired, or it's because you said, yes, I have a disability, and they just don't want to deal with it. You'll never know because they found a legitimate legal way to be like, we don't want you. We want someone more experienced with maybe 1 year more of management experience than you. You'll never know. So then you say, no, you don't have one. And then you start the job and you're like, surprise, I do. And they're like, but you said no in the application. So now they're not legally really supposed to, or, need to give you that help. And it's like, you kind of lose sometimes, lose.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from, and there is that fine line you have to walk, um, and and I would dis I would agree with you in regards to the the biases out there and why the initial rejection will come in.
Yeah.
But I would disagree with you that because you didn't disclose on the application doesn't mean that they can't that they're not legally obligated to provide it. They're still legally obligated to provide it. It's I think you need to. I'm not fully aware of the American Disability Act. I am aware of it, but I don't know the ins and outs of it. I'm sure if you go through the legalities of it, they're still obligated,
Right.
because they are aware of they should be anyways. I mean, but then again, we're talking about legislation here, so it all depends on how you want to read the legislation. But they should be aware of the fear of disclosure and what happens after disclosure. And of course, after disclosure is that then you have to prove that to them. And at the same time, you also have to prove to them that in actuality, they will get tax rebates and a lot of things will be covered under the Disability Act, and they're completely unaware and ignorant of what is
Mm.
actually in the Disability Act.
Right. It kind of feels like those teachers that are foaming at the mouth are now the ones hiring me, and then they still don't know the system and they still don't care. And then it's like, I'm back to square one.
Fortunately, that is the case, and that's why I drew that line earlier that what happens in the classroom does happen in the workplace, and that's where again you and other neurodivergents need to become aware, and myself included, need to become aware of what the law is out there, what is there to protect you, and to become an advocate for yourself in spite of their ignorance. And and in a lot of ways too, that the barrier, a lot of the ways the legislation is a barrier in itself, in the sense that you have to disclose, you have to have a diagnosis, you have to
Yeah.
present it in this particular way, and it's like, well, that's a lot of work to go through when I'm just
Yeah.
trying to get a job and keep my job. So I mean, it's this
Yeah.
whole red tape of how they want to handle it. And the reality is there's a lot more people out there who are neurodivergent than the numbers actually are.
I think it's also scary. I'd be overthinking, I do that a lot, but I'm thinking like if I go through with it, the job knows they give me a reasonable accommodation, but they don't like it and they don't like me. Now I have to be a perfect employee because legally, if I'm late 5 minutes, if my uniform isn't pressed perfectly, they can say, hey, you were late 5 minutes, though you were late again 1 minute, your uniform wasn't pressed. That's 3 times, write up, write up, write up, you're fired. And legally, I can't sue because I can't prove that they fired me because they don't want to deal with that anymore because they have write-ups and written documentation. Like in the restaurant industry, it's a verbal and then it's like a written and then it's 3 write-ups and then boom, you can be fired. So it's like if they do that for me and they find little things to pick on about me, like you didn't close a restaurant properly, write up. You didn't say this and that in the staff meeting, write up. Then they can fire me and I can't defend myself. So then I have to be always on time, always perfect, never make a mistake to like be the perfect employee. And like I would have to know then if I'm being fired for no reason, then it's because they don't want to deal. Other than that, I can't ever prove it. And that puts 10 times the pressure on me because I have to be a perfect person, perfect employee, and I don't have that wiggle room like other people have. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I ran late. My daughter was crying on the way to school. Oh, okay, it's no worries. Like, no, because with me, they're gonna write me up and then unjustly fire me, and I can't ever prove legally that it was for that reason or because they don't want to deal with me anymore. So it's like I just wish it was easier.
Yeah, I admit it's a tough one. It definitely is a tough one. And in that regards, it is that hypocritical behavior. And you
Yeah,
pointed it out in that last example. My daughter was sick, or my daughter was, crying, or I had a difficult time with my child. There's that
yeah,
complete understanding. Yet when you're
right,
neurodivergent and you say, my executive function has interfered, they're completely ignorant, they're completely unaware, they don't have the awareness training, and
right,
that adds into that those roadblocks being put in place. I would still argue though, and again it will vary from situation to situation, that there are potential ways of disputing it based
right,
on one's disclosure of being neurodivergent. And it's,
right,
in a tribunal, if there's a record of you disclosing, a record of
yeah,
you explaining why these things happen, and despite that, their unwillingness to understand or to adapt to you, then there is cause, from your end. I mean, it also requires you to A, disclose, and B, document on your end. So you could document that on this date, at this time, I spoke to my manager for the third time, explaining, and for them to understand we came to this kind of resolution of how we can work around and adapt, and then I still got to write up, you know,
yeah,
2 days later for whatever reason. Then there is that documentation that can go towards a potential tribunal in covering that. But of course, that requires the work on your end, unfortunately, doesn't it, to do that, and I think there is that, as you stated, and again, you've painted a very good description where you need to be perfect, and
yeah,
and that stress of you needing to be perfect, because there's that fear of that stigma and being ostracized, and the fear of losing your job because you're
right,
not meeting that perfect standard.
right,
And then of course that leads into the fear of what you said again, I'm being picked on.
right.
So you have taken us into a various chapters of your life, and we've now arrived in your adulthood, and we've actually started already covering your adulthood, of how
Yeah.
your dyscalculia affects you during your career and your work life. Can you elaborate even more so on how that's affecting you?
I think I've managed to overcome a lot of hurdles over the years to the point where I can appear as a normal person. I want to say, like, people might not immediately figure out that I am neurodivergent. Very good at putting on masks and, shields and things, but sometimes it'll still get to me. Little things like obviously I need my Apple Maps everywhere I drive, no matter what, it doesn't matter. I'll memorize the way to work, for example. You know, I'll leave on time. I've memorized it. I don't have my phone on, like maps is not on because I know the way. And then like the road that I always turn left on happens to be closed. And now I turn right and I'm like, I'm lost. I have no idea where I am. I don't know how to go. I'm completely lost. Now I'm 15 minutes late. I'm in the wrong street. By the time I find my phone, by the time I'm navigating where to drive, like people are behind me, people are stressing me out. I have to either pull over if I can to figure out my maps, or I'm like on my phone picking out my workplace and putting the address in and driving and going through traffic and just taking random turns left and right. Now I'm late, right? So now my boss is like, why are you late? It's difficult to explain. I memorized the route to work, but one road was closed, and then I ended up going 20 minutes the wrong way because I was overwhelmed and confused and I have no idea where I am. That's difficult to explain to somebody. And then the second thing would be just navigating the math. It's hard being in charge of people, especially when I graduated college here in Vegas in 2019. I was 23. I went immediately into management. I was a 23-year-old manager, and I was managing staff that was like 45. Like there was servers who were 45 years old. There was, you know what I mean, bartenders that were like 32. And I was a child. I was a baby to these people. I barely had respect because of my age. And now here I am telling you what to do and how to do your job. And then I'm taking over the register for you for a quick second. And I'm over here like 20, 35, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And they're like, who hired you? What are you doing? Like, why are you counting on your fingers? Are you insane? And it's just like, that's always been the struggle. Like, for me to have to explain myself to staff that I'm supposed to be their like leader and their superior. Now I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, I have to use my fingers. Like, I get confused. And so it's just gotten to the point where I'm like, I have dyslexia. And what? You know, like I'm just like so brutally honest with it to like staff members that if someone's like, why can't you count? I'm like, because I'm dyslexic. Anything else? And they're like, oh, no, I guess not. I'm like, good talk. You know, like I'm just gonna take extra time and we're all gonna deal with it. You know, the world will not burn. And then people usually are like, okay, I guess we don't have a choice. I'm like, no, we don't. You know, like this is just who I am. I can be the manager, I can be the boss, but I can't figure out this simple math. So I'm gonna take double the time and you're gonna watch. You know, like I don't know what to tell you. So it's definitely struggles, but over the years I've learned to just be, I guess, authentic to myself and just be like, too bad. Nothing like the world isn't gonna go up in flames and no one's gonna shoot me for taking extra time with my math. And so it's like sometimes I lie to guests and I'm like, I'm so sorry. This is my first day. It's not my first day. I've been here for a year. You know, it's like whatever it takes, people don't know the truth. So I'll like tell little white lies. I'll navigate however I can to get through. But for the most part, those are my biggest issues in the workplace for sure.
Yeah, I love your direct candor,
Yeah.
and you're 100% right, because I've done it so myself, where I've had to turn around and say I'm visual motor, visual perception, I'm dyslexic, I have executive function issues. Now figure, deal with it, and this is what it means. So, this is the situation where you just have to be so direct and advocate to individuals. And there's also the aspect as well, in any workplace, there's always going to be that cultural and age gap between employees.
Right.
And that even becomes even more of an issue where you have to justify and explain yourself despite that age gap of your neurodiversity, and why that I'm dyscalculia doesn't mean I can't be your manager.
Right.
So it's what was it? Does my dyscalculia interfere with the end result that I produce? And obviously it does not.
Right. Yeah. And I think I've definitely like it's weird being an adult because I feel like I'm almost 27 now. I'm an adult person. I can defend myself and I really don't care anymore. So it's like I will be blunt and I will be like, so what? Like, what are you gonna do? Bully me for taking a little bit more time to count your change? I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, get it together, right? So I just wish that I could have been like that as a child or somebody would have been like that for me as a kid because it's like I took so many years of being not able to defend myself and stand up for myself to now just going up to someone and being like, I'm going to take 5 times the time to do this math problem if you keep interrupting me. So just give me a second. I'm dyslexic. Too bad. You know, and I've definitely gotten into arguments with bosses who are like I said, in their 60s, 70s, and they're used to doing things like from 40 years ago. and I have to sit them down and be like, that's not how the world works anymore. You're wrong. Like, I need a little extra time, and it's okay, and we kind of like open them up and be like, were you ever confused in school? Were you ever like bullied for not being able to do something? And if they're like, yeah, I'm like, wouldn't it have been nice if someone had just given you a little bit more time? They're like, yeah. I'm like, exactly. I'm like, the task is still being done. I'm still doing everything that I need for my job description. I'm like, there's no issues. Chill out and give me like a little bit more time to figure this out.
Yeah,
You know.
what 100% right. And it's actually funny because I was having a conversation in the end of last year with a number of managers and directors about the current generation gap. And it's always funny in the sense that when we take a look at the current generation, which you happen to fall into, because I'm obviously a number of years older than you, is that there is this attitude of that this generation doesn't want to work, or this generation is difficult. And it's, wait a minute, you're not realizing that you've used a particular word there, generation. You're dealing with a different generation, and it's where you are expecting them to adapt to you, but you're not willing to adapt to them and how they want to work and how they learn and what's best for them to be able to be more productive in your company.
Right. And realistically, like when you go into the future, you go forwards, you don't do things backwards. It's like we're not reverting back our cars to like the 1960s or 1920s when it was like the simplest of wheels and like no airbags, you know what I'm saying? Like just because it worked then doesn't mean it's gonna, like, it just, that doesn't make sense. Like it's the progression of time that caused advancement in technology and education and learning in the way of doing things. And so it would make more sense for older generations to be like, why is this new generation doing it like this? Why is there so much conversation about that? Would this have helped me if like this has been available when I was a kid? Like rather than being like, no, the way that I did it 40 million years ago is the way it needs to be done for the next 40 million years. It's like, come on, that's unrealistic. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
now you're just being it's like it's reasonable to learn something new and like to do it in a different way and to, like have more fun with it and like to be more aware of certain like learning styles and techniques and things like that. It makes everyone's life easier and more inclusive, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said there. So, as you know, Nina, this podcast is about bringing more awareness in the workplace about neurodiversity and how to support neurodiverse talent.
Hmm.
So, from your perspective, and you really started to give us quite a lot of that,
Hmm.
how can things be done differently? And what strategies can you share with other neurodivergent talent in the workplace?
I think learn what's best for you as fast as possible. For me, like little things like taking a 5 minute break, I get very overstimulated sometimes to the point where I just want to like break down and cry. And most people are like, what is wrong with you? You're too emotional. But in reality, I just need to take a 5 minute break and take a breather and maybe drink some cold water. So I think there's ways around that in the workplace. Saying things like, hey, I'm gonna go check my emails in the office really quick. Okay, go do that. Like, I'm gonna go do the schedule for the employees. Okay, awesome. Like, go do that. I'll be like, I'll be back in 10 minutes. I'll just get started on that. Like, even if you are doing work, if you're kind of secluding yourself for a second, you're able to just like take a deep breath and be like, okay, let's just relax our brain for a second and like recalibrate almost, take a little sip of water and like do this little task and then go back out to the craziness. That helps a lot. And like figuring out those little tips and tricks that work for yourself and implementing them kind of like sneakily into your workplace can help a lot during the day and throughout the week.
And what would you share as being a manager yourself to your fellow managers and how they need to become more aware and how to support neurodivergent talent?
I think just to be more open in the way that you think about people in general, no matter what age you are, what generation you're from, people can be very close-minded. And it's like we're evolving into a society that's more inclusive in all aspects, um, as well as neurodiversity. So it's like just being more open to the possibility that someone might do things differently or need a different way of going about something for them to feel comfortable, confident, and smart and able is like okay. And I think just being open to like listening to people. Like if I'm telling someone, hey, like I struggle with this and it would help me if I could just, take 5 minutes or if I could just take an extra little bit of time to figure this problem out. Um, just accepting it and like letting it go and not being so crazy and like stubborn goes a long way, you know, because that's what I do with staff. If they're like, you know, hey Nina, I just need a little bit of time to do this and that, or I don't like it when you bring up my name in the middle of pre-shift. I get very nervous saying things. I'm like, no problem. Would you prefer to just, you know, take notes instead for everybody else? Yeah, that works perfect for me. Awesome. I'm happy, you're happy, everyone's happy, no one's getting hurt. There's always a different way around a problem than just yelling or belittling someone or things like that.
Fantastic. Well, Nina, I want to truly thank you for sharing your journey with us, especially since it is currently now 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in the morning for you. You have
48
been what time?
2:48 in the morning.
2:48 in the morning. You have been absolutely magnificent. And once again, I love your description and your true, honest self and your candor.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Hey, listeners, I also want to encourage you to continue to support this podcast so I can bring more amazing content. You can do so by visiting my Patreon page, where you can connect with me more directly with several options. Till next time, take a leap and transform.